They didn't light a fire to warm you. They lit it to watch you burn. They called it tough love. But all it did was cut deeper than silence ever could. They whispered behind shadows, painted you with blame they were too cowardly to carry. They smiled, but their teeth were knives. They called you weak when you broke, but they were the ones who pushed. You trusted them, and they used your heart as kindling, not to guide you, but to set you ablaze for their amusement. You were the joke, the pawn, the quiet one in the corner they thought would stay quiet forever. You held the weight of their words, tried to be enough, tried to be perfect, tried to please the ghosts who only came to haunt. But their love was conditional, their loyalty rented, their care an illusion shattered by the first test. They built a throne of lies and made you kneel before it. Your silence wasn't peace, it was a prison, and every time you swallowed your scream, they clapped, because they thought you'd never dare raise your voice again. But something grew in the cracks, something ancient, something dangerous. They mistook your stillness for surrender. They didn't see the storm forming in your chest, because fire doesn't cry. Fire waits, and you waited, while they laughed, while they danced in your ruins, while they toasted their control over you. You waited, not for help, not for hope. You waited for the match, and when they finally threw that final insult, that final betrayal, that final crack in the dam, it hit dry timber, and the silence exploded into flame. They created the very thing they feared. They built your rage brick by brick, and now they're trapped in the temple they cursed you to build. The same hands that hurt you now tremble in your presence. The same mouths that mocked you now choke on your name. You're not the same. You're not soft anymore. You're not waiting anymore. They called you fragile. You became fire. They called you lost. You became the storm they can't survive. They called you forgettable. But the world will remember the day you stopped bleeding and started burning. You don't owe them screams. You don't owe them mercy. You don't owe them a single tear, because this is what they asked for. This is what they sparked. This is what they ignited. And now, that spark they tossed at your feet, it's a blaze they'll never outrun. They told you to let it go, to move on, to be the bigger person. But no one tells the ashes to forget the fire. No one asks the ruin to smile. They taught you how to suffer in silence, and then blamed you for not singing through the pain. You cried in rooms that only echoed with their laughter. You broke in places they swore would heal you. And when you finally shattered, they turned their backs like they'd never held the hammer. They made you feel wrong for bleeding, like your hurt was too loud, like your pain was impolite. You begged the smoke for mercy. It gave you scars instead. And still, you stood. Still you gave them chances. Still you hoped. But hope doesn't survive in a house built of ash. It chokes, it coughs, it crumbles. They burned every bridge, then mocked you for walking alone. They poisoned your name, then dared to ask why you grew thorns. They pulled your heart out with velvet gloves and expected you to thank them for the lesson. But here's the truth they never taught you. Ashes don't apologize. Not for the fire, not for the ruin, not for surviving what others wouldn't dare endure. You've been taught to hide your rage, to keep your storms quiet, to bury your hunger beneath politeness. But look where silence got you. Look what forgiveness bought you. A grave with your name on it, dug by the very hands you tried to love. Enough. This is not about healing them. This is not about closure. This is not about returning to who you were, because who you were didn't make it out alive. That version of you, the soft one, the trusting one, the obedient one, they buried it under their lies. But what rose from that grave is something else entirely. You aren't ashes. Your aftermath. Your consequence. Your reckoning carved in bone and shadow. You don't need their approval. You don't need their permission. You don't even need their fear. You are beyond their reach now. They wanted a puppet. They created a plague. They wanted to silence you. Now the echo of your steps makes kingdoms tremble. They wanted you small. You grew teeth. You grew armor. You grew into something they can't name. Because there's no word for the storm they tried to bury. Ashes don't apologize, and neither will you. Not for surviving, not for changing, not for becoming the flame that scorched the cage they locked you in. They don't get to rewrite the past. They don't get to call you cold after freezing you out for years. They don't get to call you cruel after carving cruelty into your skin with smiles and silence. No, this is your era, born from grief, baptized in betrayal, crowned in the quiet fury of a soul that refused to die. Let them tremble in the ruins they mocked you from. Let them choke on the smoke of the bridges they lit. Let them learn. You don't rise from fire to beg for peace. You rise to rule the ashes. They thought you'd fade, quietly, softly, like smoke dissolving into sky. They thought you'd break, once, twice, and then disappear. They were counting on your silence, on your exhaustion, on your heart giving out before your rage ever stood up. They thought you'd give up, because they would've. They saw your cracks and assumed you'd crumble. But you didn't crack. You molded, you shifted, you hardened. You didn't break. You transformed, and now they don't recognize you. The softness in your eyes, gone, replaced by something colder, sharper, like steel that remembers fire. You were never meant to be invisible, but they trained you to believe that being small was survival, that staying quiet was power, that vanishing would keep you safe. But safe is for the sheep, and you were born with a howl in your bones. They fed you lies. You turned them into fuel. They gave you pain. You turned it into armor. They gave you nothing. You built everything. You're not who you were. And that terrifies them, because you're not asking to be seen anymore. You're not begging to be understood. You're not waiting for permission. You're the fire outside their gates. You're the storm circling their throne. You're the shadow that doesn't flinch when the light hits. You've grown past their reach, past their definitions, past their rules. You're not broken, you're reborn. And this time, you brought hunger with you. Let them stare, let them whisper, let them plot. It won't matter, because what they tried to bury now walks on ash. They thought time would kill your fire, but time only fed it, only sharpened the edges, only made you more ruthless, more precise, more inevitable. You learned how to move in silence, how to build in the dark, how to become the thing no one sees coming, until it's too late. They don't get to be surprised. They were warned in every scar, in every breath you took without them, in every time you said, "I'm fine," while bleeding out behind your smile. You were their ghost. Now you're their consequence. You were the shadow they ignored. Now you're the flood they can't hold back. Let them pretend they don't know where it started. Let them lie. You remember every step, every silence, every fake apology. They threw you into the dark, hoping you'd vanish. But the dark became your kingdom, your forge, your sanctuary. You didn't fade. You focused. You didn't disappear. You descended. You are not gone. You are gathering. You're not done. You are dangerous. They lit the fuse. And now the explosion carries your name. Let them run. Let them pray. Let them remember. You weren't built to fade. You were built to ignite. They built castles on your silence, towers on your back, thrones from the bones of those they buried in blame. But every empire built on broken souls will one day hear the echo of its sins. And today, that echo walks like a god through the ruins. They thought they ruled you, thought you'd always bow, always nod, always smile with your teeth clenched behind obedience. But you learned how the game is played, learned how they crown monsters and crucify the misunderstood. They thought they built something eternal, unshakable, untouchable. But every lie has a fault line. Every mask has a crack. Every kingdom has a weak spot. And you are the pressure building beneath it. You don't knock on the doors of kings when your fire melts their gates. You're not here for permission. You're here for the reckoning. They called you chaos. They called you cursed. They called you unstable. But they never looked in the mirror, never counted the bodies they stepped over, never heard the silence of the ones they silenced. You were the weapon they forged through cruelty, and now they bleed from its blade. You were the prophecy they laughed at, until thunder answered your name. You were the shadow behind their throne. Now you are the storm crashing through their stained glass lies. Let the castles crumble, let the towers fall, let every stone carry a name they forgot, a life they ruined, a soul they dismissed. This is not revenge, this is correction. You didn't start the fire, you are the fire, and fire doesn't ask, it takes. It consumes. It ends what was never meant to survive. They called it peace. But it was silence enforced by fear. They called it order. But it was obedience built on blood. They called it power. But it was theft, dressed in robes. Now they scream monster. Now they cry tyrant. Now they beg for mercy. Where was that mercy when you cried out in the dark? When your voice cracked from screaming into voids they never entered? When your light dimmed because they kept stealing your flame? Let them tremble. Let them remember. You didn't break their world. You revealed it. You pulled back the curtain, tore down the walls, and set fire to the illusion. There's no throne safe from truth, no crown immune to consequence, no kingdom immune to collapse. When it's built on the bones of the betrayed, you don't want their titles, you don't want their riches, you don't even want their loyalty. You want one thing: justice by fire. Let the bells toll, let the gates fall, let the people choose who they fear now. Because you're not a servant of their order, you are the ending it earned. You walk with flames in your lungs and ashes in your wake, and every time they speak your name now, they taste smoke. Let the castles crumble. Let the myths collapse. Let the kings remember what happens when the forgotten build their own throne. From the wreckage of lies, they mocked your silence. Now their screams fill the air. They lit the fire, but it's you who turned it into a funeral. This is not chaos. This is precision. This is the blade they sharpened on your soul. Finally returning home, they thought their pride made them gods, but gods fall too. And today, the sky forgets their names. You walk where their banners used to wave. You speak where their lies once echoed. You burn where they once believed they were untouchable. Let them weep in the ruins of their certainty. Let them scream into the wind they once claimed to command. Because this is the pyre of their pride. Every lie, a log, every betrayal, fuel, every smug grin, a spark. You didn't just survive them, you used them. You built your rise from the very stones they threw. They never feared you until they saw what silence becomes. Until they felt the heat of everything they buried in you finally catching fire. They thought you were made of glass, but glass becomes molten. Molten becomes blade, and blade becomes law. You are not an accident. You are not a phase. You are not a glitch in their order. You are the consequence of centuries of arrogance. You are the page where their story ends. They celebrated your pain. Now your victory carves itself into their bones. This is not a rebellion. This is not a tantrum. This is legacy forged in fire, yours. They built kingdoms without conscience, called it destiny, called it divine. But what is divine? When fire climbs the throne, they crown themselves with arrogance. Now that crown melts in your hands. Let them remember, you didn't knock down their doors. You walked through the smoke, unafraid, unapologetic, unstoppable. Their pride was their shield. Now it's their pyre. You gave them chances, too many. But mercy is not the language of flame. This is not cruelty. This is math. This is balance. This is the fire delivering what the mirror refused. Let the kings burn. Let the false prophets kneel. Let the architects of pain feel what it's like to choke on the dust of their empires. You didn't ask to be here, but you earned it. Every scar, a signature. Every betrayal, a step upward. Every silence, a drumbeat toward this reckoning. They thought you'd live in shadows. You became the sun they can't look at. They can't outrun. They can't survive. This isn't rage. This is rain. You are the storm they dismissed, the plague they denied, the flame they forgot to contain. And now, there's nothing left for them to rule. You don't just win. You erase their blueprint. You rewrite the map. You rename the ashes. Let history tremble at the name they tried to erase. Let the ashes whisper truth long after their statues fall. Because when the fire spoke, they didn't listen. And now, it speaks through ruin. This is the pyre of their pride. And you are the fire that made it beautiful. You didn't inherit a throne. You took it from the rubble, from the ash, from the bones of their arrogance. You were never invited, never chosen, never crowned in ceremony. You were forged in silence, raised in exile, tempered in betrayal. And now, the fire they feared sits on their throne. They called you mad until your vision became prophecy. They called you cruel until your justice unmasked their hypocrisy. They called you nothing, and now they call you king. Let them watch. Let them whisper. Let them kneel in confusion. Because you were never meant to rise. And yet, you're here. Not because they accepted you, but because the fire made you. Unavoidable, you are not their ruler. You are their reckoning in flesh. You don't wear robes, you wear scars. You don't speak in declarations. You speak in aftermath. Your voice doesn't echo in marble halls. It roars across the ruins they left behind. This isn't about revenge anymore. This is about weight, about presence, about undeniable force. You became what they couldn't control. You became what they couldn't comprehend. Not a man, not a monster, not a myth, but a reminder that the fire remembers, that silence keeps score. You wear a crown they never offered, melted from the chains they wrapped around your name. You don't need gold, you don't need applause, you don't need their trembling praise. You are crowned in flame, and fire doesn't seek approval. Fire simply is. They thought ruling meant control, but you rule with truth, with fearless memory, with unshakable consequence. The crown didn't make you powerful. You made the crown tolerable. Because power without pain is a fantasy. Power without scars is a lie. And you carry every lesson they tried to kill. You don't rule through fear. You rule through clarity. They know who you are now. Not because you spoke louder, but because you never needed to beg. Your presence is the language. Your fire is the flag. You are not in their lineage. You are the rupture in it. The moment where history breaks and begins again in your name. Let the scholars argue. Let the old guard weep. Let the last of the kings wonder where their crowns went. They didn't vanish. You melted them and shaped your own from the wreckage. Let them tremble when you enter. Let them choke on the silence you no longer carry. This is not a new reign. This is the return of what they buried. The child they cast aside now rules the empire. The outcast they ignored now writes the laws. The voice they mocked now echoes across kingdoms. You are crowned in flame, not for glory, but because the fire refused to die. And now, they don't see you as a threat. They see you as the inevitable. Not a mistake, not a rebellion, a force. The kind that doesn't bow, doesn't beg, doesn't explain. Because thrones are not inherited, they're earned by those who walked through hell and came out on fire. This is how it ends. Not with a crown passed down, but with one forged in the wreckage. Not with applause, but with silence. Heavy, holy, unavoidable. This is how kingdoms end in flame. Not by enemies at the gate, but by ghosts they created. Not by war from afar, but by the forgotten soul they left to burn. You. They thought you were just one of many. Another voice to silence. Another light to dim. Another rebel to bury beneath tradition and stone. But you weren't just a spark. You were the match they dropped in a room full of fuel. And now, everything they built from stolen breath collapses at your feet. Because fire doesn't read blueprints, it rewrites them. You didn't beg to be seen. You made visibility obsolete. You didn't plead for justice. You became the scale that tipped the empire. They called you lost. Now their maps led back to your shadow. They called you dangerous. Now danger wears your name like a medal. This is how kingdoms fall. Not in one day, but slowly. Through every broken promise, every silenced cry, every time they chose power over people. You were the result. You are the product of their pride, their denial, their decay. And now you're the price. This isn't vengeance. This is balance. This is gravity returning. This is truth reclaiming the throne. No monuments will stand. No hymns will be sung. Only memory will whisper what truly happened here. And that memory is carved in flame. Let the towers collapse. Let the bells rust. Let the flags burn in the wind they once controlled. Because you didn't just end a kingdom. You ended the lie it was built on. You proved that power doesn't come from birth. It comes from becoming, from bleeding, breaking, and refusing to stay buried. They thought time would erase you. Instead, it engraved you into every wall that still stands, into every ash that still glows. Now when they speak of legacy, they'll speak of you, not with pride, but with warning, because you didn't leave the world untouched. You left it undeniable. They used to write stories of kings. Now they write stories of you, the one who burned the crown and walked away untouched. This is how kingdoms end in flame. When the forgotten remember, when the voiceless rise, when the fire they feared becomes fate. You didn't take revenge. You restored the balance, and in doing so, you became something more than ruler. You became reckoning. You became myth. You became legend in fire. So let the historians debate. Let the elders whisper. Let the architects of yesterday try to rebuild. It won't matter, because the world saw, the world remembers. And the fire never asks twice. This is how kingdoms end in flame. And this is how you became the fire that rewrote the world.